So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar in this series of health talks as part of the Save Molly Citizens campaign. Our previous webinars have focused on the impact that climate change has had on our mental health and on our physical health. And today I'd like to add to that perspective through the work and insights of our eminent panel working in the field of what is called One Health, an approach that aims to optimize health outcomes, bearing in mind the interconnection between people, plants, animals, and our shared environments. I'm pleased to present to you our panel for today. Our first speaker is Dr. Abhi Vanak, DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance Program Fellow in Intermediate Clinical and Public Health, a Senior Fellow at the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation at the Ashoka Trust for Research and Ecology and the Environment, ATREE in Bangalore. An ecologist by training, Dr. Vanak combines his interests across the field of animal movement, ecology, disease ecology, and human-wildlife interactions to better understand the dynamics of emerging infectious diseases in rapidly changing landscapes. His current work uses the One Health framework to examine dynamics of rabies in multi-host systems and the factors contributing to the risk of vector-borne diseases in socio-ecological systems in India. He is also the lead author of the One Health and Zoonosis sub-program of the National Mission. Dr. Vanak, welcome to our webinar, and thank you for your time today. Our second speaker is Dr. Niti Jadeja. She is an environmental researcher, currently working as a postdoc associate at ATREE in Dr. Abhi's lab, where she's performing phylogenetic analysis of rabies based on viral genomes of dog rabies. Her research makes use of the next-gen sequencing techniques for understanding microbiome behavior and their interaction in the environment and health. She also volunteers as a chapter coordinator for Global Emerging Water Leaders Steering Committee 2020 to 2022 of International Waters Association, where she helps young water professionals collaborate from national chapters and promote networking across the chapters. She also conducts community outreach and teaches about One Health in the local community to promote collaborations across human health, animal health, and environmental health under the One Health Lessons initiative in the Asia region. She's also a member of CEDRIC, a part of Wellcome Trust UK, where she works towards identifying antibiotics in the environment and their impact of human health and environment. Through her research, she's been able to make contributions to various working documents and reports, including the IPCC report and UN Interagency Coordination Group for AMR. And finally, our last speaker for today is Dr. Joseph Fernandes, who has recently completed his doctorate from the Department of Biological Sciences at BITS Pilani in Goa, focusing on reproductive endocrinology, focusing on PCOS and obesity. He also worked on effects of metal complexes of cancer using in vitro methods. During his doctorate, he has co-authored about 12 research articles, yielding a total impact factor of around 17. And he's also co-founded a non-profit organization called Neo-Amet, or New Environment, to tackle increasing environmental adversities by setting up compost pits in schools and residential complexes, promoting the reduction of garbage, promoting garbage to garden concepts in Goan villages, and delivering climate change awareness skills in schools, colleges, and other complexes. He's also an athlete and a musician, and often worries about the receding human civilization, which he wishes to address in the near future. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of our panel members and our speakers today. Myself, I am Nerissa Santimano. I am trained in public health and have been working in public health for the last about 12 years. Currently, I work as a COVID-19 advice and guidance scientist, and the other part of my role involves promoting prevention approaches in the healthcare system. Thank you to everybody for joining us today and for your time. I think I would like to start by asking a very broad question to anybody in the panel who would wish to contribute about just what a lay explanation for what this One Health approach is. So if I may come to you first, Professor Abhi.
Thanks. One Health is it's a fairly simple concept and the approach, and it makes intuitive sense. It basically says that health itself is an interconnected concept between humans, animals, and the environment. And the catchphrase for the One Health framework is healthy animals, healthy environment, healthy people. And it functions as a framework that calls for coordination or collaboration between the different spheres, which are sometimes, for example, human health is often based on a very biomedical basis. There's the interconnections between human health and animal health are not directly made apparent, but of course, now that we are dealing with a zoonosis related pandemic, it's come front and center to all of us how interconnected we are. So that's what the One Health framework sort of aims to bring together these different fields, so that you can look at health from a holistic concept.
And why? So when we think about health, we often only think, like you said, we only often think about human health, and again within that, we often only think about physical health. There isn't that parity between physical human health and mental human health, which we have talked about in previous webinars, and is a widely known issue. And then this further disparity between human health and the health of the environment or health of plants and animals around us. Why is it something that we should be thinking about? I guess maybe through a few examples you could illustrate.
So I'll give an example, and then I'll invite others in the panel to provide some more. But especially when it comes to things like zoonosis, so diseases that can transfer from animals to humans. Okay, these can, so trying to treat a disease once it infects humans is one part of the picture. Okay, but prevention, of course, or understanding where they come from is broadening your horizons, and trying to sort of get a better understanding of the ecology of this disease. Because after all, let's think of all the pathogens that are out there, bacteria, fungi, and if you want to even consider viruses, they are part of biodiversity. They are part of a living ecosystem. And they normally have natural cycles of infection within animal hosts, and every once in a while you can have what's called a spillover event. So a virus or a bacteria or some other pathogen jumping over to a different kind of host. Often it could be livestock. I mean, look, we now our livestock biomass is far greater than wild animal biomass in the world now. This is the Anthropocene that we're living in. So our livestock form an important interface between biodiversity and human societies. And often this spillover happens via this intermediary. And because we are so much in close contact with our livestock, then there's an increasing chance of those pathogens spilling over to us. So a couple of examples that come to mind are Nipah virus outbreaks, or the MERS outbreak that happened a few years ago. Even the current outbreak that we are currently witnessing, the SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, it is thought that it may have come from bats via some intermediary route, which may have been through contact with an animal in a wet market, potentially. They're still trying to investigate where this outbreak came from. But these are the kinds of examples that you can think of. There are various others. I mean, things like rabies, of course, is one of the oldest known zoonoses, and rabies is something that still affects a large proportion of the world's population. And rabies, of course, comes from the bite of a rabid animal, usually a dog, throughout Asia and most parts of Africa. Europe, it might be through the bite of a rabid fox. In the US, it could be through bats or raccoons. So, so understanding these linkages is really important for us to understand where human well-being comes from and how tightly it's linked to animal health, animal well-being, and the importance of a healthy environment.
Thank you. That makes so much sense, actually, but it's, like you said at the very start, it's a very easy to understand concept, but often one perhaps that is overlooked. I wonder if anyone else on the panel would like to add to that. Niti, might I come to you next?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to talk here. I'll take it from the point of livestock that Dr. Abi mentioned, and how the same interconnectedness is at the center of the issue AMR, antimicrobial resistance, which is as equal to as climate change crisis currently. And here, to give you an example of how the transmission pathways cover the human, animal, and the environmental domain, and it serves as a classic example of One Health by means of when these antibiotics are used in animal rearing, which is largely being practiced, the misuse, the overuse of these antimicrobials in animal health, human health, and food production. So that has put every nation today to a high risk of AMR. And to explain the impact, when these antibiotics are being used in animal rearing, these are not completely utilized by the animals, by the livestock. So their intermediates or the remains go into animal waste, which is then applied into agricultural soils. So that's how it enters the environment. Also through runoff, it enters the rivers, the water bodies. So that's how it enters these large ecological niches now. And our food is grown in these soils. So there are reports of plants like carrots, radish, and spinach, etc., having these antimicrobial residues, which are then consumed by us. So the whole transmission pathway, and it is being tackled or managed by the One Health approach, which lies at the center of the Global Action Plan for AMR, which came out in 2015, and India itself has its own National Action Plan, which is also being now adopted by a lot of states. So yeah, I'll stop speaking there.
No, thank you. I think that's a really, really good example. I liked the terminology that you introduced when you said the transmission pathway spans the human, the animal, and the environmental domain. And so what, in effect, what you're saying is even if human beings and human health systems become more prudent in their use of antibiotics, so, we've seen campaigns, for example, that encourage people to take their full dose, not to just take a few tablets and then stop taking it. So even if we improve our personal behaviors with regards to human health about the use of antibiotics, what you're saying is we might still be exposed to antibiotic components or microbes that have developed some resistance to the antibiotic components through our food chain, through the soil and through the water resources, because of how antibiotics are also being used in animal husbandry or cattle rearing. So the first thing that comes to mind, is the burden of disease caused by multi-drug resistant TB, for example, in India, which is a massive problem. And I'm not on the latest, but I believe we're on third line or fourth line, treatments for drug-resistant TB, and actually the rate at which that drug resistance is evolving is much faster than we have been able to evolve our defense mechanisms and our treatment mechanisms. So production of new and novel antibiotics, for example. Dr. Abi mentioned COVID-19 as another example of this zoonosis, which is very real and a very recent example. I would struggle to find anybody that wouldn't have been impacted by the latest wave in India, for example. But we've had similar, pandemic potential diseases in the past. And I wonder how many recognize that, for example, HIV emerged as well in a similar way through the theory is the cut hunter or the wounded hunter theory, I believe, where there was an interaction between, I believe, bushmeat and a human individual, and a mixing of bodily fluids, blood, for example, in this case, which has then evolved into a pandemic of HIV, which has spanned 4 decades. I think lots of people, when we talk about HIV, we forget that that is still a pandemic, and it evolved in that way. It was of zoonotic origin. I've been reading lately in preparation for this webinar, and I understand, for example, that COVID is the 6th emergency or public health emergency in the last decade. I guess, and that makes me think, are we experiencing a faster rate of re-emergence or emergence of such zoonotic diseases or infectious diseases in the last few decades as compared before? Would anyone like to comment on that?
Okay, so I wouldn't mind commenting on that. But before, if I may go a little back on the One Health approach that we're talking about. So One Health is, as Niti and Abhi both mentioned, absolutely is the integrated process within the environment, plant, animals, everything that is living organisms. However, I want to emphasize on the importance of the various sectors that play an important role in contributing towards the emergence of One Health. Sectors in form of the various committees in terms of biodiversity, forest, water, etc. So all these contribute largely into the emergence of or holding the sanctity of One Health. And I think that just integrating the sectors is not sufficient in order to emerge or proceed with the approach of One Health, but trusting each other in various sectors is an important approach that I think we are lacking at certain point in order to proceed with the aspect of One Health, and something that needs some urgency in order to rectify of where we are heading with such issues. Talking about the emergence of other zoonotic diseases, of course, the humans have been one of the victims in order to be in that situation of having various diseases and pandemics and outbreak of pandemics. And of course, we are highly responsible for the contribution of such pandemics as well. Is something why I refer to the receding human civilization as well, something that we may talk about later on. However, our actions, our contributions highly govern the outbreaks of such pandemics and also contribute to emergence of new pandemics. For example, even in terms of plants, there are the phytoviruses, which have the ability for a cross-kingdom interaction. And there are various reports that do mention the emphasis of the cross-kingdom interaction. And there are plant viruses which are also known to be present in, for example, the various food processes that are available, which still have the tendency of causing viral infections. And there are a lot more such examples where there are interactions within various kingdoms that contribute to the emergence of various pandemics. So yeah, I would like to listen to more of what Abhi has to say on this as well.
So, one of the things that's linked to, so coming back to your question, yes, the rate at which we are seeing the emergence of zoonosis has increased, especially in the last few decades, and it's been unambiguously linked to the rate at which we are changing the natural environment. As we've converted large parts of the world The forests have been cut down, the grasslands are being converted, the wetlands are going, our oceans are being overfished. So our impact on the environment directly disrupts natural cycles of circulation of pathogens in the environment. Now, many of these have co-evolved with their hosts. So they don't necessarily make them, so the outbreaks of these diseases that occur in natural host populations very rarely tend to exceed or go out of control, because there's a correction, there's an inbuilt correction mechanism. But when natural populations or these natural cycles are disrupted, either by land conversion from forests to pasture land or agriculture, whatever it is, or when wildlife is taken out of their natural surrounding and brought in either for the live meat trade or for the live pet trade. And I mean, let's not forget that there's a lot of talk about illegal hunting and bushmeat and so on, but there's also a legal trade in wildlife. And that is also a massive, massive contributor to the risk of zoonotic disease emergence. And this is a global trade, no less. So when you then start, stressing animals out, or when you start bringing together animals of different species that may not have naturally occurred to each other, then the stress results in a lowering of natural immunity, and throws those pathogen cycles out of whack. In the case of viruses, for example, especially mRNA viruses, they have the ability to mutate very rapidly, and when they can, when host populations achieve high viremia, or there's a lot of virus circulating in their bodies, the rate of mutation allows a mutant to maybe potentially transfer into another animal where it would possibly not have made that animal sick before. It can. And because, often these animals are kept in crowded conditions, it can quickly spiral out. So you can have an outbreak occurring in a population of wild animals. You can have a spillover event, often into an intermediate host, as I mentioned earlier, which can be domestic animals. Now think about how we raise domestic animals. Okay, we raise them in factory farms, which we have thousands of animals kept close together. Think of chickens, think of livestock, pigs or cattle, and these are not natural conditions. Often these are high-producing hybrids, so they are meant to grow very fast. They're often pumped full of antibiotics, as Niti mentioned, because their immune systems are pretty depressed. Okay, so this allows these kinds of pathogens to quickly reproduce, and so you have a massive outbreak, a massive spike in the number of animals that can get infected, and then the chance that a pathogen then spills over to humans increases. So basically, we are creating breeding grounds for new kinds of pathogens to emerge into the environment because of our own actions, because of the way we are producing food, because of the way we're interacting with the environment. And often the people that suffer from it the most are the poorest of the poor, okay, because they are the ones often in the first line. Now, what makes an outbreak? So there could be a local outbreak, but what makes it turn into a pandemic? That's the globalized lifestyle that we have adopted. Okay, we're able to now rapidly fly from one part of the world to another. Trade routes can take animals from one part of the world to another. So it's basically everything that we're doing currently. This world that we're living in, that we have celebrated. All the progress that we've seen, that's also putting us in danger. And then, of course, we have this massive crisis, this emergency of climate change that we're facing, that's only going to make everything worse. So yeah, it's all doomsday. I'm sorry to say that I have nothing
positive.
To say at this moment. It's
no good news.
It's going to be pretty bad. If you think 51 degrees Celsius in Sicily is bad now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, yeah. Niti, I wondered if there was anything you wanted to add before, because Dr. Abi touched upon so many different sort of angles there. Was there something you could add?
Yes, because I agree with what Dr. Abi said, and just to resonate more on that, we've already seen about more than 1 degree temperature rise compared to the pre-industrial area because of industrialization, development, and if we look at the current times, we've seen floods and fires all around the world in the past 3 months, and that itself is quite a reason for everybody to think why are these events happening out of view, and what is the reason. So to give the environmental perspective with respect to pandemics, of course, the change in how the landscape are being invaded, human activities are invading into the natural spaces, the biodiversity hotspots, and which is impacting how these animals interact with each other. They work on the principles of species diversity, genetic diversity, and that, as Dr. Abi mentioned, that there is a inbuilt mechanism going on, and we've sort of gone and interfered in that with our development, building infrastructure, without assessing the ecological footprints of our projects. So, for example, short hydro projects, small scale hydro projects, they are being considered as a very positive approach compared to the large dams that are being built. But there are recent studies which have done comparisons, and they've come to the conclusion how these initiatives have also impacted the connectivity, the ecological connectivity, especially of water bodies. So yeah, I think the environmental perspective can no longer be ignored, saying that it's not as important as human health or public health projects. So,
Thanks,
yeah.
thanks. Joseph, in the introduction, we mentioned that you had done some work on endocrinology and sort of focusing on PCOS and obesity. It made me think about the very recent report in Goa of microplastics in our tap water. And if I understand correctly, I believe that microplastics in tap water also then have a role to play in endocrine dysfunction and disruption. You might be able to say more on the human side, but I know it doesn't just impact human health, obviously, and human reproductive health. We know that when microplastics are present at a certain level, at normal human consumption, I say normal human consumption levels, in the rivers or in oceans, turtles, for example, I believe their gender, is determined by the temperature of these water bodies where they live and they survive and reproduce, and you might have an imbalance there, therefore then impacting the future of a certain species, in this example turtles. But I know that the impact is there on human reproductive health as well. Is there something you can share about that?
Yes, of course, yeah. So to just go back a little bit, as Niti had mentioned, the genetic similarities, there are a lot of similarities between the plant viruses and the animal viruses as well, is where the invocation of the common descent from a common ancestor. So, of course, coming to the microplastics and the disruptors, so they are called as endocrine disruptors. Because they, of course, do have a role to play in disrupting the endocrine system, as mentioned by you. And they, of course, have similarities in terms of disrupting endocrine in all other species as well, because, of course, just mentioning about the common ancestor, there are similarities between various animals, including humans, the non-human primates, the invertebrates. So there are similarities within various animals. And yes, of course, the microplastics, which have also been reported to be present in fish along the coast of Goa. And by the same group as early as 2014, I'm not sure. But they had reported that the microplastics are also present in the fish and other organisms which are present as well. So Goans are known to consume fish. So it's not the consumption through the water per se, but also through the other organisms that dwell in the areas like described by Niti and Abhi, where are polluted, and the pollution is done none other than the humans itself. So of course, apart from it having its adverse effects on other organisms, it eventually has the drastic events on humans itself. So when we talk about the endocrine disruptors, we are talking about the inability to have a healthy childbearing age in terms of pregnancy, in terms of infertility. So these disruptors would again enhance these complications that makes it difficult to have or conceive during the reproductive age.
And the other thing that I was going to ask Joseph was, again, coming back to your research study recently on PCOS and obesity, linking back to what has already been said about intensive agricultural practices, a change in what we are used to consuming, to from whole meals to more fast produced or preserved food or cured food, for example, that we know is obesogenic. And your research, I believe, is then linking PCOS and obesity as well, isn't it? So PCOS again is as an issue that often results in infertility or is associated with infertility, isn't that?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So PCOS and obesity are integrated in a lot of ways. And it's just not PCOS and obesity, it is other metabolic disorders that also are integrated with the same disorders. So eventually one would lead to the other. So one is a pathway to all the other metabolic disorders that are present, like diabetes, dyslipidemia, hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance. So there's an array of metabolic disorders that are in path or on path to disruption because of the precursor, which can be as simple as PCOS. So going to the earlier agricultural practices, interestingly, ancient agricultural practices were based on manual digging. So I did get opportunity to talk to a lot of people where they have involved themselves in manual digging and planting in agriculture. And that was mainly the exercise that people used to get. And it helped. It helped not only in terms of preventing obese conditions or polycystic ovarian syndromes or other metabolic disorders, but also helped in the longevity of those people, wherein exercise does contribute to aging and longevity as well. So it helped them in numerous other ways. And to talk now, we have a lot of gyms and alternatives to sports, yet we have a higher metabolic disorder syndrome. We can always refer to the WHO report as recent as 2020 or 2019, which suggests that, of course, we are entering into the sedentary phase, which is increasing an array of metabolic disorders. So the practices that were there earlier prevented them from a lot of these complications. However, as we are advancing into modern technology, modern kind of availabilities that are available, we have a higher rate of metabolic disorders or patients suffering from various metabolic disorders.
So thank you. What comes to mind with what you've just said is the concept of change. What we used to do, our old customs, older professions, and I think it was Dr. Abi that mentioned bats and the Nipah virus. Again, going back to coming full circle, for example, we seem to think that, oh, if a wild species or another species of animal becomes a problem, then we just get rid of them, we just cull them. So bats, for example, with changing pressure on land use, going further and further into the forest, we are then pressurizing bats to change from foraging for their usual meals within the forest to actually feeding on human-produced food products. But that also means that, like we said before, the interface, we're creating an interface for mixing with human beings and bats, which didn't previously exist before. We've got the Nipah virus example, and we've also got potentially the COVID example. What then comes to mind is, oh, bats are a problem, let's just get rid of them. But isn't it true that bats also help in controlling mosquitoes? And I understand that bats can consume, a single bat can consume as many as 6,000 mosquitoes. And we have seen the issues that we've had recently with dengue, with malaria. And it's again going back to this imbalance that one action from perhaps straying into the forest has led to at least 2, if not more, zoonotic conditions, and then potentially creating a further burden on other infectious diseases or other vector-borne diseases. And something that also struck me was that plague, for example. So, Goa has a history with plague. We know that old Goa was devastated many centuries ago. But this is the point that I want to highlight. We seem to have forgotten that actually, thousands of people passed away because of the plague. But actually, plague, even though we may not see it commonly in Goa, it often re-emerges in other parts of India, for example, very close to Goa, just in Karnataka. In Maharashtra. I was just going to ask, I believe you have done some work, or you might be able to share some information about, older customs or indigenous practices that might be more aligned with the One Health approach, like Joseph highlighted earlier.
So in many cultures, it's not called One Health, but it is in practice, because health is seen as, or medicine is seen as a common, it's seen as common between humans and animals, for instance. So treating animals, you'd often use the same kinds of herbal, the same kinds of plants for treating the same kinds of illnesses, either in humans or in animals. So it was always seen as a continuum. The health was never divided in that sense. And that's also at the basis for the One Health framework, right? That health there's a lot of commonality between human and animal health, which is why we use a lot of animal models when we're looking at human health. But there are also some practices, though, that may sometimes end up inadvertently increasing risk for communities. Although let's take the example of ticks, for instance. Okay, most people, most Adivasi communities who live in forested landscapes have learned how to deal with, or use natural repellents for trying to avoid getting bitten by ticks, because there was an association between getting bitten by ticks and then perhaps, of course, tick bites themselves are painful, but there are also associations with getting sick from tick bites. So they try to avoid getting bitten by using oils, or by using some tobacco or other kinds of preparations, herbal preparations as natural tick repellents. Now, why is this important? So let's take a disease that occurs in the forested landscapes of Karnataka, which has now spread to parts of Goa and Maharashtra as well. So this is Kyasanur forest disease, or also known as monkey fever. So this is a tick-borne virus that that humans can get if they've been bitten by an infected tick of a few species, mainly one or two species of Hemiphysalis and Ixodes ticks. But the complex life cycle of this tick is I mean, it's very interesting, and this disease in some way highlights the connection between wildlife, humans, and deforestation or change in landscape. So this disease was first discovered in Karnataka, in Shimoga district in the early 1950s or in the mid 1950s, and it was a really excellent example of One Health surveillance, because the team that was put together to understand this disease consisted of people who are epidemiologists, virologists. It also included Salim Ali, the famous ornithologist, the birdman of India, because one of the hypotheses was that this may be coming from Siberia with ticks that are brought in by migratory birds. Okay, so because there's a similar hemorrhagic fever that's found in Siberia, in the Russian Far East. Okay, so they brought in all these different disciplines, and then they caught monkeys, because it's called monkey fever because you'd see lots of dead monkeys in the forest. Okay, so then they autopsied these monkeys and they followed them around. In fact, they would sit up in machans at night looking at observing monkeys to see what happened to them. In one instance, they even had a monkey on a leash and walked it through the forest to see if it was attracting ticks. So they did a lot of really pioneering research to understand the dynamics of this disease. And we are revisiting this, 50, 60 years, 70 years later, because there are still gaps in our understanding of this disease and how it's now spread to other parts of the Western Ghats. Has it spread, or is it now being discovered in these plants because of better surveillance? We'll find out. One of the things that we found is that land use change, the way people are interacting with the forest and with plantations, is really what predicts the risk of this disease. Okay, so plantation workers are really at risk. People who go into the forest to bring in leaf litter to bring back to their cow sheds, those are the ones who are really at risk. In Goa, people who work in cashew plantations, they are the ones who are at highest risk of getting KFD. So wherever you've cleared lowland forest to now plant cashew, those are the places where KFD is emerging the most. So these are the kinds of examples that you can show that when you mess with these natural systems, then diseases that are otherwise dormant or are not really affecting humans much can emerge or re-emerge into these landscapes. So this is an example of these kinds of interactions. And just last point here, KFD itself has an interesting cycle because ticks at different stages feed on different types of hosts. So from rodents to birds to bats or shrews when they are at the larval stage, to humans, primates, small mammals when they are at the nymphal stage, to livestock and deer and other large mammals when they're at their adult stage. So different species form part of this very complex life cycle. So it's not possible to target any one group of animals to control this disease. You really have to look at an ecosystem of animals and including livestock to understand how these kinds of very complex diseases survive in these landscapes.
What I find interesting is that you said the hosts are quite varied based on their life cycle, the life cycle of the tick. But what strikes me is actually the common denominator is actually the deforestation and the changing land use. So whilst if we, as you said very early on in the session, if we jump from prevention to treatment, then we are now in a space where we have to devise treatment policies or management policies or mitigation policies across a whole host of range of hosts, humans included, Whereas if we then stepped one step back to the prevention, we might think that actually, what are the activities that are putting ourselves in these situations? And I really appreciate that throughout the talk, we've talked of a bunch of factors. Apart from wildlife trade, we've talked about deforestation, human settlement, infrastructure projects, intensifying agricultural practices. I really wanted to bring that out in this session, and I'm glad that we did. I'd like to now move us on, just bearing in mind the time, to what are the approaches we can take going forward? What are the plans? What are the systems that we can devise to make sure that we actually have One Health in the back of our mind, or rather in the front of our mind, when we devise policies? And I think, after a quiet spell, I might come to Niti first, if that's okay.
Sure. I think collaboration sits at the heart of making One Health successful, be it zoonosis, AMR, and similar other issues. I think coming together of experts and experienced people who work for animal health, human and environmental research, platforms that can serve collaborative action will be integral going forward, and we are seeing some positive action in that direction, although not as much as we might need to address. And as Dr. Abi said, preventing these type of zoonosis diseases would have costed so much more less than what we have already lost in terms of country's economy, global economy, etc. So I think working in collaboration across sector would be key. And yeah, I'll stop speaking there.
No, thank you. Yes, of course, collaboration. And that brings me to what something that Joseph said earlier is trust in other sectors, trust in other disciplines, and how important that is a factor in collaboration. When we're faced with an issue in human health, in the health system, in the human health system, would you say, either Joseph or Niti or Abi, that actually the biomedical model hegemony, just dominates our approach to finding solutions? And Abi, you gave the example of how such a multidisciplinary team was brought together to try and understand the etiology of the KFD disease. How do we mainstream the One Health approach? Joseph or Abi or even Niti?
So yeah, just to add to what Niti was saying, things to add, I think it's important to also have more studies, like you mentioned, the biomedical importance. I think there should be more funding in terms of the budget allocated to various studies that are associated with One Health, with integrating One Health. I think there should be more studies that are done in order to keep all the aspects in mind. And I think more importantly, we should also start thinking in terms of keeping everything around us on par with ourselves, rather than looking at something where we place ourselves beyond a certain level and might take control of everything around us. So I think there should be an importance in equality in terms of everything that is there around us. So yeah, I would like to listen to what Abi has to say as well.
Thanks. So, so the principal scientific advisor, Professor K. Vijayaraghavan, said at a meeting that One Health is a great idea. It's like world peace. The thing is that One Health is such a broad framing; it really encompasses everything. But it's important to also think of how, and as you rightly said, how do you keep it at the forefront of all your thinking? How do you make it the foundation, the base, when you're planning everything? So let's look at 2 or 3 things right away. Okay, we are in a crisis situation. We know that things are going to get worse. Okay, so the first thing we need is emergency response. Okay, we need to try and see what is it that will create the next outbreak. I mean, the virus hunters, as they're called, the people who are looking for the next big one, the ones who had predicted SARS-CoV-2. So all of these folks have been saying for a long time that we need better infrastructure, better investment in surveillance, and we need to do One Health surveillance. Okay, if you look at what's being spoken about even now, it's a very narrow kind of surveillance. Is by the time you start doing human surveillance, so by the time people are sick from a disease, from a new virus or pathogen, it might actually be too late already. Okay, so you need to be looking at the source. And one of the weakest links in India, so we've got a great medical system for humans. We've got a great veterinary system in place for livestock, but the weakest link is our surveillance system for wildlife. Okay, it just falls through the cracks every single time, and it's not a priority for almost anyone. Okay, so this is one of the links that we've identified as being the weakest links. It needs to be strengthened. So proper One Health surveillance needs to be strengthened across India. We need a lot of infrastructure development. We need better labs, better high security labs, the BSL 2, 3 plus labs across India. We've got a handful of them. Country our size, no way. We need to be really ramping those up. We need overarching policy. So a policy at the central level. Okay. So we've got all these different ministries. We've got a ministry for health. We've got a ministry for science. We've got a ministry for animal husbandry, and they all have these great programs that work within them, but there's nobody to connect the dots across them. Okay, and that's why we need something which is supra-ministerial, maybe something based in the PMO's office, for instance, that can, or other mechanisms. I don't want to centralize too much, because decentralization is also important, but at different levels. So the structures need to come from the top, but the way it's implemented at state levels, at district levels, at taluk level, and at the panchayat level, where you need to change the way we train our next generation of public health professionals. Okay, where veterinarians need to be talking, if they see something new coming up in animals, they need to be immediately able to call and tell the public health professionals. So we've got something called the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program. Okay, and then we have a parallel system called NADRIS for reporting animal health stuff. Now we need those to be on a common platform. And then we need the ecological stuff on there as well, because as we've said multiple times, land use change is one of the main drivers. So we need to be able to then have scientists look at all these different patterns, these new emerging diseases come in and say, okay, what's driving this stuff? Or do it, and we need to have modelers, people who can say, look, there's a rainfall, an extreme rainfall event that's occurred in this place. There's going to be a potential for spike in mosquito-borne diseases in this landscape, or there's waterlogging happening here. So you have waterborne diseases. So those kinds of things need to come up. We need better integrated infrastructure for all of these things. And that's why, what Niti said, collaboration, what Joseph said, trust, understanding, and then it's not just the natural sciences, it's the social sciences as well that needs to come into bear. After all, people's behavior is important, health-seeking behavior, trying to understand it, trying to work with it, trying to, meld some traditional systems of medicine with modern medicine systems, work with different systems, engage with different systems, try and cross or remove some of these barriers that exist currently. So it really requires a revamp of the way we think of our health systems, but also how do we put One Health at the forefront? So far, our environmental impact assessments, when you're clearing new projects, for instance, the Save Molem campaign itself is an example, right? It should not just be seen as an environmental problem. It's not. It's also a public health problem. It's also an animal rights issue. It's also a human rights issue. It's all of these things. It's part of the climate crisis, right? So it's not just about saving forests. It's about our very health and our well-being. So that's what we need to bring into policymakers, like drill this into people's heads, like, hey, this is not just some fringe environmental group that's protesting out there. We're talking about our very lives here, okay, and our future. So this is how we need to connect all of these things. And you know, if we don't do it now, then we don't. When else are we going to do it?
I think that was really, really impassionate. That covered so many suggestions, but also I really like the encouragement to just think differently from scratch. We can no longer use our very siloed tunnel vision mindsets and policies and systems. Something that we have, well, I've been engaged in previously, is what we called health in all policies. And I wonder whether actually we should be pushing for one health in all policies. So, you know, every time a bill is taken to the Legislative Assembly, for example, or other democratic or parliamentary systems within India, is there an assessment that is conducted, not just on the, we've been talking lots about the environmental impact assessments lately, but what are the health impact assessments of those policies? What are the equality impact assessments of those policies? As you said, you know, so for the size of the country that is India, we've got so much of variation in our biodiversity. We also have such a variation in our climate and the regions and the behaviors of individuals, the customs of individuals. Yet we have you know, a health system which has got a lot of positives, but we saw a lot of negatives in the last few months, in the last 3 months, the inadequacy. And I think it wouldn't be unfair to say that actually, whilst it's a bit debatable, but it's the poorest and those in the rural and the most remote areas that feel the disproportionate burden of such impact. Often we say, you know, our developmental policies are there to improve the lives of our citizens. And we will also say that they are there to improve the lives of our rural citizens, of our remote areas. But without doing the impact assessments, I don't know how we can say that. I don't know how we can say that without the environmental, the health, and the inequality impact assessments. And so I really wonder whether there is an opportunity for us to push, therefore, one health in all policies as an impact assessment, and to bring that into the fore of all our governing decisions and our democratic decisions. I'd leave the floor open just for a couple more minutes. If there's anything else, Niti and Joseph, you want to add before, you know, I will have to move to closing remarks. Niti and Joseph?
If you'd like to go first.
No, I could not sum it better than what Dr. Abhi's already said. So yeah, if Joseph has something.
Just a minute to add to this, something that Abhi mentioned earlier as well, drilling things into people's mind. This is something that I take to the schools that I go give awareness in, wherein I say that we live in a civilized world with uncivilized minds. And I think that needs to transform on urgent basis because of every aspect that Abhi described beautifully and nicely. All of the repercussions are not so beautiful and good. Coming to the policies, I think it is urgent requirement for the governments and the authorities to start taking action on the various detrimental effects that hamper one health, not just human, but plants, animals, everything. So it is the urgent need to come to terms with environmentalists, researchers, scientists in order to get a better government system, get a better governance system in order to prevent all this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Niti. Thank you also, Joseph. And of course, thank you, Abhi, for your comments in the last section of that webinar. As I said, sometimes it feels the faster the country or the state develops, the faster we forget the lessons that our civilization has learned over the centuries. And I'm sure we will be very quick to forget the last 6 months and the traumatizing 6 months that we have experienced in India recently as well. Or maybe we want to forget. As they say, you know, ignorance is bliss. And so I hope that this webinar has given the audience reason to pause in their everyday lives and perhaps dwell a bit more in their everyday actions of the links that we've tried to outline here and the impact that we as human beings are having that might actually come back to bite us or to harm us. So with that, very, very informative discussion, at least in my mind, I wish to thank all of you, our speakers, for this very insightful session, lending us your valuable time. And I also thank, in the background, Gautam from the IT team at ATREE, who's been very quietly supporting the technicalities of the Zoom webinar in the background. I don't know, again, if there's anything you would like to add, but for me, a very big thank you to everybody this afternoon.
Thank you. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks, Niti, as well.
Thanks for the opportunity. Lovely discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Gautam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.